Have you ever felt that strange exhaustion that comes not from doing too much, but from seeing too much? That quiet fatigue of explaining something obvious and realizing halfway through the sentence that the other person is not listening to understand, only waiting to defend themselves. Have you ever looked into someone's eyes and sensed that your words were falling into a closed room where no light enters and no question is allowed? If this feeling is familiar, then this video is not an accident in your life. There is a subtle loneliness that doesn't come from being alone, but from being awake among people who prefer comfort over truth. It's the loneliness of realizing that clarity is often treated as arrogance, that depth is mistaken for negativity, and that thinking independently feels almost like a crime. You begin to notice patterns, repeated phrases, borrowed opinions, recycled certainties, spoken with absolute confidence, yet never truly examined. And something inside you grows heavy, as if carrying a knowledge you never asked for. This is not about intelligence as society defines it. It's not about diplomas, vocabulary, or being right in debates. It's about something more intimate and more painful. The awareness that most people don't actually think. They react, they imitate, they protect their ego as if it were a fragile relic. And when that ego is threatened by a simple question, the response is rarely curiosity. It is often irritation, mockery, or silence. There is a reason why this hurts so deeply. Because the one who sees clearly is not only observing the world, they are feeling it, feeling the noise behind the words, feeling the fear behind the opinions, feeling the emptiness behind the certainty. And over time, this sensitivity becomes a burden. A quiet question starts to echo in the mind. Is there something wrong with me or with the world I'm trying to belong to? Long before social media, long before endless opinions flooded every corner of life, one thinker looked at humanity and named this condition without mercy. He didn't call it ignorance, he didn't call it lack of education, he called it a kind of inner blindness, a refusal to see beyond what is comfortable, popular, or socially rewarded. And he warned that living among it would be one of the greatest tests for anyone seeking inner freedom. What he understood is unsettling, but also strangely relieving, because once you see it, you can no longer unsee it. And the real question is no longer why people don't think, but what happens to the ones who do. There are moments in ordinary life when something feels slightly out of place. Nothing dramatic, nothing you could easily explain to someone else without sounding strange. And yet inside you, a quiet certainty forms. This is not random. It might begin with a dream that lingers long after you wake up. Not vivid in a cinematic way, but emotionally heavy, charged with a feeling you can't shake. You go through the day carrying it with you, replaying fragments, sensing that it wasn't just your mind recycling memories. Or maybe it's a sudden unease in your chest, a pressure that appears without warning while everything around you seems normal. No clear cause, no obvious threat, just a signal your body sends before your mind can explain it. Some people notice it as a recurring thought that interrupts silence. Others feel it as fatigue that sleep doesn't cure, or a restlessness that appears precisely when life is supposed to be stable. And many experience it socially, that moment when you're surrounded by people yet feel profoundly disconnected. Conversations feel scripted, opinions feel borrowed, laughter feels mechanical. You listen, but something inside you pulls away, as if your inner world is no longer synchronized with the one around you. At first, you might dismiss these experiences. Stress, imagination, coincidence. That's what we're taught to do. We're trained to distrust anything that doesn't fit neatly into logic or productivity. But over time, a pattern emerges. These moments tend to appear when you're questioning something deeply, your path, your values, your place in the world. They show up when you feel torn between adapting to what's expected of you and honoring what feels true inside. There's a subtle mystery here that most people never stop to consider. What if these signals aren't malfunctions, but messages? Across cultures and eras, sensitive individuals have described this same phenomenon, an inner language that doesn't speak in words, but in sensations, intuitions, and emotional disturbances. It's not superstition, it's not fantasy. It's the experience of realizing that consciousness doesn't operate only on the surface level we're encouraged to live in. And when someone begins to sense this, life changes in a quiet but irreversible way. This awareness often brings discomfort before clarity. You may start noticing how much of daily life is built on repetition rather than reflection. How often people speak without listening, not just to others, but to themselves. You may feel an unspoken tension when you refuse to laugh at things that feel hollow, or when you hesitate to agree just to maintain harmony. And with that tension comes isolation, not because you reject others, but because you no longer fully recognize the rules of the game. Everyone else seems so comfortable playing. This is where the pain deepens, because you don't want to feel superior, you don't want to judge, you don't want to withdraw, you simply want meaning. And yet meaning feels scarce in a world obsessed with speed, certainty, and appearance. So the inner signals grow stronger, the dreams become more symbolic, the body reacts faster, the silence becomes louder than the noise. Many people at this stage ask themselves a dangerous question. Why do I feel like this when everyone else seems fine? And even more unsettling, what if they're not fine? They're just not listening. The mystery is not that these signals exist. The mystery is why some people feel them intensely while others seem completely untouched. Why some are disturbed by superficiality while others thrive in it. Why some are haunted by unanswered questions while others are comforted by ready-made answers. And perhaps the most unsettling thought of all is this: what if these experiences are not signs that something is wrong with you, but signs that something is trying to wake you up? If that's true, then the real question becomes impossible to ignore. What is this inner language trying to protect you from? And what is it preparing you to see? There is a first sign that almost no one talks about openly. Not because it is rare, but because once you name it, you can no longer pretend it isn't there. Ancient traditions hinted at it. Philosophers circled around it. Mystics felt it in their bones. Yet modern life teaches us to ignore it, medicate it, or distract ourselves from it. This first sign is not a vision. It is not a miracle. It is not even pleasant. It is the moment when awareness begins to hurt. At first, it appears subtly. You start noticing contradictions. Others glide past effortlessly. You hear words that don't match intentions. You sense when conversations are driven by fear, status, or imitation rather than truth. And the most unsettling part is this: you realize that pointing it out rarely brings clarity, it brings resistance. This is where many people misunderstand what spiritual awakening actually is. They imagine light, peace, answers. But the earliest teachings warn of something very different. They describe awakening as a fracture, a crack in the illusion that allows light to enter, yes, but also lets discomfort flood in. Ancient thinkers understood this deeply. They observed that most human behavior is not guided by reason, but by unconscious desire, the need to belong, to be validated, to feel superior, to avoid inner emptiness. When awareness sharpens, you begin to see this machinery operating everywhere. And once you see it, participating blindly becomes almost impossible. This is why the first sign often feels like alienation. You may notice it in simple moments, a group conversation where everyone nods in agreement, yet you sense no one has actually thought about what's being said. A heated debate where the goal is not understanding but victory. Advice given confidently, yet rooted in unexamined assumptions. You listen, truly listen, and something inside you pulls back, quietly saying, "This is not real." What ancient wisdom teaches is that this discomfort is not arrogance. It is not cynicism. It is not superiority. It is the nervous system reacting to a deeper truth. Clarity isolates before it liberates. There is a reason old spiritual texts speak of walking a narrow path. Not because it is morally superior, but because fewer people are willing to endure the discomfort of seeing clearly. Awareness strips away comforting narratives. It removes the protective padding of shared illusions. And suddenly, what once felt normal begins to feel heavy, repetitive, almost unbearable. This is also why many awakened individuals experience guilt alongside clarity. You may think, why can't I just relax like everyone else? Why can't I enjoy the surface of things? The answer is difficult but honest, because once perception deepens, pretending becomes exhausting. This first sign carries a hidden meaning that changes everything. It reveals that intelligence and awareness are not tools for domination or debate. They are burdens of responsibility. You are no longer protected by unconsciousness. You can no longer outsource your thinking, and this responsibility extends inward, not outward. Old teachings were clear on this point. The awakened mind must first learn restraint. Not every truth needs to be spoken. Not every error needs correction. Not every battle deserves energy. The real discipline is internal, learning when silence is wisdom, when withdrawal is preservation, and when engagement is truly meaningful. This is where many people fail. They mistake awareness for a weapon. They argue, correct, expose, and soon clarity curdles into bitterness. The ancient warning was always the same. Knowledge without humility poisons the knower first. The true initiate learns something counterintuitive, that the first task of awareness is not changing others, but protecting one's inner equilibrium. Awareness must be paired with compassion, not because others deserve it, but because without it, awareness becomes unbearable. If this resonates, pause for a moment. This kind of reflection is rare in a world that rewards speed over depth and certainty over honesty. If you feel drawn to this way of seeing, consider quietly supporting this work. A simple like or subscription helps sustain this circle of shared insight, a community that values depth over noise. And yet, this first sign is only the beginning, because once awareness becomes painful, a deeper question emerges, one that ancient teachings considered the most dangerous threshold of all. What happens when you realize that most suffering is not imposed by the world, but maintained by the mind itself? That realization changes everything, and not in the way most people expect. There was a time when I believed clarity was something you shared. If you understood something deeply enough, you had to explain it. If you saw a contradiction, you had to point it out. Silence felt like complicity, and so I spoke, often, carefully, patiently, or at least I thought I did. I remember one evening in particular, a small gathering, nothing intense, soft lighting, familiar faces, casual conversation drifting from work to opinions, from news to certainty. At some point, someone stated something confidently, a conclusion stitched together from fragments they had absorbed somewhere else. It wasn't malicious. It wasn't even aggressive. It was simply empty, repeated without digestion. I felt that familiar tightening in my chest, that inner signal. This matters, something inside me whispered. So I spoke, calmly, slowly. I asked a question instead of making a statement, then another. I wasn't trying to win anything, I was genuinely curious. But as soon as the questions touched the structure holding that certainty together, the atmosphere changed. Faces stiffened, humor evaporated. Someone laughed nervously, another interrupted. The tone sharpened. I could feel it, the invisible wall rising. What struck me wasn't disagreement. I had no problem with that. It was the hostility toward thinking itself, as if pausing to reflect was an insult, as if uncertainty was dangerous, as if clarity threatened something sacred but unnamed. I went quiet after that, not because I was defeated, but because something inside me broke open. On the walk home, the night felt heavier than usual. Streetlights hummed, my footsteps echoed too loudly, and for the first time I asked myself a question that felt almost forbidden. Why does seeing clearly feel so lonely? That question stayed with me. Over time, similar moments repeated. Different places, different people, same pattern. The more I tried to communicate from depth, the more resistance I encountered. And slowly, something shifted. I began to notice that the exhaustion I felt wasn't coming from others. It was coming from my need to be understood. That realization was painful, because beneath that need was ego, not the loud, arrogant kind, but the subtle one that believes clarity must be recognized to be valid. I wanted others to see what I saw, to confirm that my perception wasn't isolating me for nothing. And every time that confirmation didn't come, I felt smaller, sharper, more alone. The transformation didn't happen suddenly, it unfolded quietly. I stopped correcting people mid-sentence. I stopped explaining ideas that weren't being sincerely asked for. I started listening not to words, but to readiness. Some conversations ended before they began, others deepened unexpectedly, and something surprising happened. The inner tension softened. I realized that lucidity doesn't demand expression, it demands containment. There was relief in that, a strange peace, as if I had been carrying a heavy instrument through crowded rooms, bumping into everything, and finally learned when to set it down. I didn't become indifferent, I became selective, and that selectivity changed everything. Not everyone noticed the change, but I did. I slept better. My thoughts slowed, the constant internal debate quieted, and the world, though still noisy, still repetitive, stopped feeling like an enemy I had to fight. It became something I could observe without bleeding into. That was the real transformation. And here's the part that matters most. Once I stopped forcing clarity outward, it began to deepen inward. Insights became sharper, intuition clearer, silence more meaningful. It was as if something ancient recognized the shift and responded. If you've lived moments like this, if you felt the weight of seeing too much, of explaining too often, of being misunderstood without knowing why, I want you to know you're not alone. Your experience matters, and it carries meaning. If you feel comfortable, share your own moment in the comments, a sign, a realization, a quiet turning point you've experienced. I read them, and sometimes I bring them into future reflections, because these stories form a hidden thread connecting those who are paying attention. But there is something deeper beneath this transformation, something rarely spoken about, even among those who consider themselves aware. Because once you stop explaining yourself, you begin to notice why so many people can't hear in the first place. There is a second sign that appears only after the first one has settled. Not everyone reaches it, and those who do often misunderstand it at first, because it disguises itself as frustration. This sign reveals itself whenever you feel an invisible resistance rising inside you. Not toward effort, but toward meaningless engagement. You notice it when your energy drains the moment a conversation turns shallow, when your body tightens before you even speak, when something inside you quietly says, "This is not worth my attention," even though nothing outwardly seems wrong. Most people fight this feeling. They label it laziness, arrogance, impatience, or emotional distance. But ancient teachings describe it very differently. They understood resistance not as rejection of the world, but as discernment awakening. This sign appears when your inner compass begins to function without conscious effort. You no longer need to analyze every situation intellectually. Your body reacts first. Your intuition speaks faster than your thoughts. You sense which environments nourish you and which ones drain you, not because of drama, but because of alignment. And this is where the hidden meaning lies. Resistance is not telling you to escape life. It is teaching you where not to bleed your energy. In old philosophical traditions, this was considered a form of inner hygiene. Just as the body rejects what harms it, the awakened mind learns to reject what dilutes it. The problem is that modern life rewards the opposite. We are taught to always engage, always respond, always have an opinion. Silence is mistaken for weakness. Selectivity is mistaken for coldness. But the second sign asks a difficult question. What if your exhaustion is not from doing too little, but from giving too much to the wrong places? This realization often arrives quietly. You may notice that after certain interactions you feel foggy, irritated, or strangely empty. After others, even brief ones, you feel grounded, clear, restored. The difference is not intelligence, it is presence. Some spaces invite authenticity, others demand performance. Here is where the practical key emerges. The technique is simple, but not easy. For the next few days, practice this. Before speaking, before responding, before explaining, pause for 3 seconds. Not to think, to sense. Ask yourself one silent question. Is this interaction rooted in openness or in defense? If it is defense, withdraw gently, not emotionally, not dramatically. Simply reduce your investment. Shorter answers, softer presence, less explanation. This is not avoidance, it is conservation. You are not here to convince everyone. You are here to remain intact. Many people fear this practice because they think it will isolate them. In truth, it does the opposite. It filters noise and reveals depth. When you stop feeding empty exchanges, meaningful ones begin to find you. When you stop chasing understanding, understanding meets you naturally. This is why ancient wisdom insisted that awareness must be paired with discipline. Without discipline, sensitivity turns into suffering. With it, sensitivity becomes guidance. What's powerful about this sign is that anyone can recognize it. You don't need special knowledge. You don't need belief. You only need honesty. Your body already knows when something costs too much. Your intuition already reacts before your mind rationalizes. And yet, this is still not the deepest layer. There is a third sign, quieter, rarer, and far more unsettling, that emerges only when resistance has been mastered. It is not felt as discomfort, but as a strange calm that appears before the world reacts. Most people never notice it. Those who do often don't know what to do with it. That sign changes how you see not only others, but yourself. If this reflection resonates, consider joining this growing circle of awareness by subscribing. This space exists to explore what most conversations never touch. Slowly, honestly, and without noise. Because what comes next is not about protecting your energy anymore. It is about understanding why you were sensing all of this long before you could explain it. There is a sign so subtle that most people miss it entirely. Not because it hides, but because it doesn't announce itself with fear, pain, or urgency. It arrives quietly, almost gently. And when it does, everything you thought awakening was supposed to feel like begins to dissolve. This sign appears when the inner noise finally loses its authority. After confusion, after resistance, after learning when to withdraw, when to conserve, when to remain intact. What emerges next is not excitement. It is stillness with awareness. You notice it in moments that seem insignificant from the outside. A pause before reacting. A calm that appears before a difficult interaction. A sense of knowing without urgency, without the need to prove or explain. The world doesn't change, but your relationship to it does. Ancient teachings describe this state in many languages. Some called it discernment, others called it alignment. In early contemplative traditions, it was understood as the moment when the mind stops chasing meaning, because meaning begins to reveal itself. This is the sign few are prepared for, because it dismantles the final illusion that awakening is about becoming more. In truth, it is about interfering less. You begin to sense that most suffering is not caused by what happens, but by the internal commentary that rushes in afterward, the interpretation, the defense, the imagined battles. And when this commentary quiets, something extraordinary happens. Reality becomes lighter. This is where ancient spirituality and modern understanding quietly meet. Physics tells us that observation changes systems. Mysticism tells us that attachment distorts perception. When you stop gripping every thought, every outcome, every identity, awareness becomes clean. And in that clarity, intuition sharpens beyond emotion. You don't react to life anymore. You respond slowly, selectively, deliberately. This is why this sign often feels unsettling at first. You may wonder, why am I calmer than I should be? Why doesn't this provoke me anymore? Why do I feel distant, yet deeply present? The answer is uncomfortable but freeing, because your sense of self is no longer entangled with every external movement. You are no longer seeking validation through reaction, and that detachment creates an inner authority nothing outside can grant or take away. Early spiritual traditions warned that this stage would feel like a quiet separation, not from people, but from illusion. You still care, you still feel compassion, but you are no longer controlled by the emotional weather of the world. This is not coldness, this is sovereignty. And here's the truth few dare to say aloud. Once you reach this state, you cannot go back to unconscious participation. The noise becomes obvious. The manipulation becomes transparent. The urgency loses its grip. That's why so few reach this point, and why those who do often remain silent about it. Because silence at this stage is no longer absence. It is presence without performance. If this resonates, take a moment, quietly, to support this work. This content is created with intention and passion, not profit. A simple like or subscription strengthens this space, this growing community of people choosing depth over noise, clarity over chaos. But there is one final layer left to uncover. Because when silence begins to answer you, a new responsibility emerges. One that challenges not your understanding of the world, but your role within it. And the question it raises cannot be ignored forever. If you've made it this far, it's because something inside you recognized itself along the way, not intellectually, but inwardly. These signs were never meant to impress you. They were meant to reveal you to yourself. And now, standing at the end of this journey, one truth becomes clear. Awareness is not an accident. It is a calling. The dreams that unsettled you, the discomfort you couldn't explain, the resistance to shallow noise, the silence that began answering you. None of it was random. These were not distractions pulling you away from life. They were invitations pulling you deeper into it, invitations to live consciously in a world that rewards unconsciousness, invitations to move slowly where others rush, to listen where others react, to remain whole where others fragment themselves trying to belong. And here is the most important realization of all. You were never meant to awaken against the world, but within it. There is a common misconception that awareness leads to isolation, withdrawal, or cold detachment. But that is only true when awareness is incomplete. When these signs mature, they do not turn you away from humanity. They return you to it with clarity. You begin to see people not as obstacles or fools, but as beings operating at different levels of fear, habit, and conditioning. This doesn't make you superior. It makes you responsible. Responsible for how you speak. Responsible for how you listen. Responsible for where you place your attention. Because once you see how easily minds are influenced, distracted, and driven by imitation, you can no longer pretend your presence doesn't matter. Every calm response becomes an anchor. Every moment of restraint becomes protection. Every conscious silence becomes a form of teaching, even if no one notices it immediately. This is the hidden mission behind awakening. Not to preach, not to correct, not to dominate conversations or expose ignorance, but to embody another rhythm, a rhythm that doesn't need applause, a rhythm that doesn't depend on agreement, a rhythm that quietly stabilizes the space around it. When you live from this place, something subtle begins to happen. People feel calmer around you without knowing why. Conflicts lose intensity in your presence. You become less reactive, yet more precise. Less visible, yet more impactful. And this is how real transformation spreads, not through force, but through coherence. You may still feel moments of loneliness. That doesn't disappear entirely, but it changes texture. It becomes spacious rather than heavy, purposeful rather than painful. You realize you are not alone, you are simply early. Early in listening, early in sensing, early in refusing to live on borrowed thoughts. And there are others like you, quietly scattered, watching, feeling, awakening without banners or slogans. This space exists for them. For you. If this journey resonated, I invite you to take a simple step that strengthens this connection. Leave a comment sharing your name and city. It's a way of acknowledging your presence here, and in future reflections, I may personally mention and greet some of you, because these stories deserve to be seen. Also, remember to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Each gesture supports this work and helps grow a community built not on noise, but on depth. And as you return to your life, into conversations, choices, and quiet moments, carry this with you. Awakening is not about escaping the world. It is about learning how to stand within it, without losing yourself. And once you understand that, nothing you see will ever feel quite the same again.